Thank you for giving me the amazing privilege of physically working surrounded by books. I feel like, I don't know, a pig in clover, or it's just such a delight. And I'm going to keep this very brief so that people have time to enjoy the roof deck. But this is a kind of show and tell of some objects that will feature in this year's Lyle lectures, which deal with the circulation of print within Victorian households, and especially with the role that masters and servants played in either helping or hindering each other's reading. So I'm especially interested in those lectures, in the tension between how servants acted as a principal, reading in their own right, and how they acted as a proxy, facilitating other people's reading, which is problematic, that may be of interest to, professional interest to many of us in this room. As a teacher, I feel like I do both, and my students' reading and my own reading, and there is, they don't always dovetail. So the books that we've got here are all what these otherwise disparate objects have in common, other than the fact that they are all produced somewhere in the 19th century, is that their addressee, as narratologists used to say, is a domestic servant, but their buyer, their implied buyer, is not a domestic servant. They all obey a top-down mode of distribution where they're marketed to gentry to be distributed to dependents of various sorts. And that mode of distribution, I'm going to try to argue in the lectures, cuts across otherwise different material forms. And the two main material forms that you're going to see here, well, maybe three material forms. One involves stab-stitched pamphlets. Another involves bound reward books. So these are a genre that later in the century, with the rise of formal institutional schooling, will morph from something given by a patroness or a mistress to a dependent into the kinds of books given at schools, whether Sunday schools or day schools, as a reward for good attendance or good behavior. I am preventing my itching fingers from turning to the paste down, where in many examples of this genre, you find elaborately inscribed reward stickers or reward tickets. And one of the contrasts that you find with this genre is a completely pristine, untouched, crisp, beautiful text block next to a verbose, scribbled over paste down. And the striking thing about those scribbled over paste downs is that you very seldom find an ownership inscription. What you're much likelier to find is a givership inscription. That is, it's the mistress going on and on about her kindness to the recipient. And in one case that I can't show today because it's sadly not at the Bodleian, you can find the recipient copying out in her kind of stumbling cheap pencil the inscription to Maggie, So she's writing her own name, but in the voice of the mistress. And so we could think more about what that kind of ventriloquism is doing. Just two more points about these before we begin the Mad Hatter's tea party and you start to circulate around the table. This comes from the Opie collection. It's an, I think, 1824 case which Andrew Honey identified as being made of mahogany, which is particularly interesting because, again, I will not open it, but several of the tracts contained in it, so these are stab-stitched tracts that have survived thanks to being bound together and then collected in this kind of deluxe case. Several of the tracts contained within it use a plain, well-scrubbed deal table as a marker of virtue. This is kind of the opposite of plain, well-scrubbed, humble but clean deal, which is a cheap softwood. So we could think about the tension between the material form and the thematic content. And if anyone here has encountered other comparands, other kinds of traveling case, other instances where the case contrasts with the contents, I would really be grateful to hear from you in the discussion period. This is 1824. These are three examples of a tract by Mrs. Sherwood, probably known to some people here as the author of Little Henry and His Bearer and many, many other evangelical tracts. There are two translations, one produced in Bangalore, Wesleyan Mission Press, one produced in Bombay. So this gives you some sense of the geographical and linguistic spread of these tracts. And these four are produced domestically in Britain. They're examples of a microgenre that is produced for and about teenage girls about to enter domestic service. So these all have titles like My First Place, Her First Place, Jessie's First Place, Mary's First Place. They could have been written by ChatGPT. There are 1,000 of them. And the two that are next to each other here are two editions of Harriet Russell, The Young Servant-Maid, where you can see the frontispiece. The text has not been reset, but the frontispiece has been redrawn in order to update the headgear of the mistress who is shown, as so often in these frontispieces, handing a book to the young maid. These are unusual in that often in the frontispiece, which is the only illustration to these tracts, often you see the servant, but you don't see the mistress's head. And my guess is that this is because servants' uniforms aged less quickly than ladies' clothes, and the book would not have as long a time to amortize the initial investment if the lady's bonnet goes quickly out of date. Alex, are people allowed to just kind of parade past?
Yeah, Yeah.
Great.
If you have, yeah, thank you very much. Well, thank you, and then we'll come and look at